Xi Jinping has set his sights on Taiwan. It's unclear whether the U.S. under President Trump would come to Taiwan's defense.
This uncertainty has been lingering over Taiwan since he returned to the White House.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Today, Taiwan looking at what's happening in Ukraine for clues. Also on the show, countries in Europe are restricting asylum.
The public is not against the principle of asylum, of, welcoming people who are fleeing conflict.
So what is driving the trend?
A young surfer in Iran defies the odds. Because she wants to be the best.
Plus, climate change is coming for French wine. We'll hear the government's plan.
All that and more today on The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thanks for joining us. We start with a phone call between President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. During their conversation yesterday, Xi reportedly discussed Taiwan and China's ambition to take control of it.
The U.S. has long walked a fine line on this, defending Taiwan but being careful not to incite China. Under the Biden administration, American support for Taiwan was more explicit. Trump appears to be walking that back.
He has basically returned to the longstanding strategic ambiguity where the United States is not going to publicly confirm whether it is going to come to Taiwan's defense in the event of a Chinese attack or not.
That's William Young. He's a senior analyst with the Crisis Group and is based in Taipei.
So in this phone call, basically, we see from the Chinese side that Xi Jinping declared very clearly China's bottom line, which is that he views Taiwan's reunification with China as an inevitable trend that will ultimately need to be accomplished. And he is hoping to make sure that the United States and Trump personally understands China's position very well and hopefully be able to have the opportunity to try to influence maybe Trump's thinking, because we know that since he returned to the White House, Trump has been sending some mixed signals when it comes to how he actually thinks about the issue of Taiwan. And in recent months, including between the meeting with Xi Jinping in South Korea last month, Trump has seemed to be avoiding mentioning or talking about Taiwan during his bilateral engagement with Xi Jinping. And this approach has created a little bit more uncertainty for people living in Taiwan with regard to the credibility of U.S. commitment and also U.S. support.
Let's get to that Taiwanese perspective. What is at stake in a phone call like this?
Due to Trump's more transactional foreign policy approach, there's always a concern that Taiwanese people don't know whether Trump would actually try to deal with China on the trade front, but in exchange make some kind of concession on the issue of Taiwan at China's demand. And so this uncertainty has been lingering over Taiwan since he returned to the White House. And some of the mixed decisions that he has made vis-a-vis Taiwan since returning to the White House has also helped to basically exacerbate that concern. And I think in recent days, due to the ongoing negotiation of the 28-point Ukraine peace deal, there's a lot more discussion and debate within Taipei when it comes to how much that is happening to Ukraine going to likely also be the situation that Taiwan might face in the event of a, say, China-U.S. negotiation over Taiwan.
Right. So Taiwan has been really closely following the trajectory of the war in Ukraine because they see, as you said, this example of a major power invading a smaller neighbor and then what happens. What are the key takeaways for Taiwan on that front right now, especially with where the peace negotiations are standing?
So there are basically two camps of the debate that are emerging in Taiwan. One camp is defending Taiwan's longstanding partnership with the United States, saying that Taiwan's indispensable role in the global semiconductor supply chain actually is exactly what the U.S. really needs right now in the global AI competition with China.
So they see themselves as quite valuable to the U.S. and preserving that relationship would be quite valuable.
Right, especially to Donald Trump personally. But on the flip side, the way that the peace plan had initially been negotiated between the U.S. and Russia had
We're talking the Ukrainian peace plan now.
Right, yes. That has, in fact, exacerbated another group raising that this is exactly the kind of concern that we would have about the credibility of Donald Trump and his administration. So Taiwan should perhaps consider creating a little bit more alternative plan for itself to prevent falling into this situation, trying to push and urge Taiwan to consider restarting somewhat of a conversation with China so that Taiwan can have a little bit of a control over its own fate in a potential similar situation like this.
You're saying that there's a camp who thinks that Taiwan should be talking more with China to try to get ahead of any potential issue?
Yes, exactly. And that's mainly coming from one of the main opposition party, KMT. They have long advocated a friendlier relationship and more exchange with China. And they have been very critical of the current Taiwan government's approach.
I want to go back to the semiconductor issue. As you mentioned, there are people in Taiwan who see the importance of semiconductors produced in Taiwan to the U.S. as protective. The U.S. is trying to move more production of semiconductors to the U.S. Is there concern then that Taiwan's leverage might be undermined if that happens?
Yes, that debate is very tightly associated with the current debate that I just mentioned. On the one hand, the opposition parties and skeptics of the Trump administration and the U.S. government is arguing that Trump's plan to pressure Taiwan to shore up production manufacturing capacity in the U.S. is going to weaken Taiwan's value and also Taiwan's position in the global supply chain. But on the other hand, the government in Taiwan is trying to convince the public that shoring up manufacturing, helping the U.S. to achieve home semiconductor capacity is actually a form of security guarantee in Taiwan because that ensures that Taiwan will continue to play a very important role.
Before I let you go, I just wanted to get the pulse on the ground in Taipei. I mean, this issue of potential aggression from China is a perpetual one. How concerned are people right now compared to, say, baseline?
I think people in Taiwan are essentially holding their breath.
As you're out and about in Taipei after major news like this, do you notice people are talking about it?
Yeah, any major bilateral engagement between the United States and China nowadays are, I think, attracting a lot of attention and discussion inside Taiwan. Immediately would become the headline of all the major news outlets and also news programs across Taiwan. I think because of this potential stake that is going to be on the line for Taiwan. And that, I think, has just become a new reality for all Taiwanese people to have to deal with.
William Young joined us from Crisis Group. He is based in Taipei.
This next item takes us to Iran, where a teenage girl is living her dream as a professional surfer. No easy feat under any circumstances. Venus Baloch has more challenges than many. That has not stopped her, though, from winning the gold medal in Iran's latest surfing competition. The world's Shirin Jafari has the story.
In the blue waters of the Gulf of Oman, a lone surfer bobs in the water. Half submerged, she paddles hard and readies herself for the right moment. As a wave rises behind her, she's on her surfboard, positioning her body expertly. She rides the wave just as she's done countless times in the past. This is a recording of Venus Baloch, practicing the sport she has come to love. She started when she was a child. At 4 years old, she first came to the beach. At 7, she learned to surf.
موقع خیلی کوچیک بودم و چیزی یادم نمیومد و برای اولین بار که موج سواری شدم.
I was so young when I started out, she tells me, from her home in Chabahar in southeastern Iran. When you're young, you have less fear. That's why the ocean wasn't scary for me. It was fun. Baloch remembers the first time she was finally able to stand up on a surfboard and successfully ride a wave.
انگار یه جایی بین دریا و آسمان هستی.
I felt like I was somewhere between the ocean and the sky, she says. It was as if I was flying. Baloch is one of a growing number of Iranians who have taken up surfing and competed in national and international competitions in the past few years. The sport was introduced to Chabahar by an Irish surfer, Eski Britton. She had traveled to the remote part of Iran to check out some of the best waves in the country. She spoke with The World in 2013.
I guess I wanted to show how surfing can not only translate across cultures, but also across those so-called gender boundaries.
Britain spent 3 years in Chabahar teaching surfing to anyone who was interested, particularly young women who faced resistance from the community. Britain's work was a turning point for Balochi's father, Abdulrahman Baloch. It was like my dream had come true, he tells me. Abdulrahman says he had always been fascinated with surfing. He had seen the sport on TV and in movies and wanted to try it for himself. When Abdulrahman heard about an Irish female surfer visiting the province, he quickly made the trip from his village to where she was staying, only to find out she had already left. He was determined to learn, but there was one problem. There were no surfboards in his village. He asked local carpenters if they could make one for him out of wood, but they ridiculed me, he remembers. They had no idea what surfing is. Britain was gone, but she had left behind several surfboards. Abdulrahman says when he saw them for the first time, he was ecstatic. For 2 years, he taught himself the sport, sharing Britain's surfboards with others. There's so much joy and pleasure in surfing, he says, you'll only understand once you have experienced it. Abdulrahman wanted to share that feeling with his young daughter. That's why he started to take Venus to the beach with him when she was 4 years old. Over time, surfing became a family affair. Abdulrahman taught the sport to his wife, brother, and his children. Something I learned from Britain, he says, is that surfing is one of those activities you have to share with others. I've devoted my life to that. Abdulrahman runs a surfing school in Chabahar. His wife is an instructor for women. As for Venus, she was planning to attend a surfing contest in India over the summer. It would have been her first international competition. But there was a war. Israel and the US carried out airstrikes against Iran. Air travel came to a stop. I had practiced every day, she says, and I was heartbroken when I realized I couldn't go. But she has her eyes set on next year's Asian Games in Japan. My goal is to become the best female surfer in the whole world, Venus says. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
If you are a parent or teacher or really anyone who spends time around kids or teens, you have likely come to dread a certain meme involving two numbers between 5 and 8. Say it with me now, 6, 7.
It's a joke, but if you don't get why it's funny, I'm raising my hand, you're in good company. Dictionary.com names 6, 7 the word of the year in part because it is, quote, meaningless, ubiquitous, and nonsensical.
Ubiquitous is right. Even British Prime Minister Keir Starmer knows about it. While Starmer was visiting a primary school in Peterborough, he spent some time reading with kids.
You can probably guess which pages the kids were on in their book.
Oh, it's not on the same page.
6, 7. Yeah. 6, 7. Everybody.
That's when the head of the British government led children in the arm-waving 6, 7 dance, much to the chagrin of their teacher, who informed Starmer on his way out that he'd broken school rules.
That's lovely, 6, 7. You know children get into trouble for saying that in maths school.
Oh, do they? Sorry about that.
No, it's absolutely fine.
Starmer shot back with a classic schoolyard defense.
I didn't start it, miss.
Of course, someone else always starts it.
You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In Delhi, earlier this month, a car bomb went off in the historic Red Fort district, killing 15 people and injuring dozens more. That was just hours after police in the India-controlled part of Kashmir announced an investigation into militant activities there. Well, that probe eventually led to the seizure of 6,000 pounds of explosives. It also revealed what police described as a much larger militant network. Since its discovery, Indian authorities have launched a sweeping crackdown, detaining hundreds of Kashmiris, raiding their homes, and tightening security across the valley. Both India and Pakistan claim Kashmir and have fought 3 wars over the territory, and a fight for independence has brought additional violence. Syed Shahriyar reports from Srinagar, the capital of Indian Kashmir.
God forgive us, repeats a woman silently, walking over the debris expressing grief after looking at the demolished home belonging to the family of Kashmiri doctor Umar Nabi, named as a prime suspect by investigators. Indian forces demolished the home 3 days after the Delhi Red Fort blast. It wasn't just the family home of the Dr. Umar that got destroyed, but several homes in the neighborhood were damaged, where now women gather to clean the scattered window panes. And while consoling each other by saying, "Thank God lives were spared." In the middle of scattered rubble from the buildings, I could see children from the village searching for torn books and piling them in a corner. I tried to find the family of suspect Dr. Umar Nabi amid the ruins. I could see his father Ghulam Nabi, but shocked and shattered as he looked at his home. We could have taken out important documents and belongings and kept them somewhere. We had no idea they would blow up our house. For now, let's see where we will stay. My wife is at one place and my daughter-in-law who lives with us is at another. Now let's see if someone will invite us to stay at their home. My daughter has also been detained. She has 2 children. We don't even know where they are. Her husband, we also don't know where he is. For many Kashmiris, things have changed since the Delhi incident took place. A sense of fear has emerged among students and professionals who study or work in different parts of India. A filmmaker from Kashmir, Said Ali, had to cancel going for a shoot to Delhi out of fear.
I was getting a good amount of money, which I was earning in this project, and also my tickets were booked. Everything was planned, and I just backed off just because I'm a Kashmiri, and I was like very much feared, very much scared to go out of my home. I didn't feel safe at all because everyone said that don't go out because you will not get hotels, you will not get places to stay.
Nasir Khuhami is a student at a university in Delhi. He also runs an organization that helps out Kashmiri students in crisis. He says Kashmiri students are being harassed and things have changed a lot for them.
Kashmiri students are being, they are being treated as refugees. They are being treated as third-class citizens, even in their own country. A lot of, students, they are facing profiling, eviction, intimidation, especially aftermath of, Red Fort blast.
On the first Friday since the Delhi blast took place, Kashmir's chief cleric, Mirwais Umar Farooq, addressed the congregation. Mirwais said that Kashmiris have always condemned all forms of violence. The people of Kashmir feel the deepest pain and empathy during every such tragedy because they themselves have endured decades of violence, the loss of lives, and a constant state of fear, experiencing this suffering in their own lives. I want to make it clear that what happened in Delhi, regardless of the motive, one cannot justify the killing of innocent people, and no religion permits it. Later, Mirwais told me that whenever such incidents occur, there is often a rush to link them to a particular community even before investigations are completed.
This creates anxiety and insecurity for Kashmiri students and professionals across India who suddenly find themselves viewed with suspicion despite having no connection to the event. Ensuring the safety and dignity of innocent citizens is essential, and collective doubt or punishment only risks alienation rather than helping the fight against violence.
But local BJP officials say those responsible for the bloodshed in Delhi should be punished for the heinous crime. Sajid Yusuf Shah is a BJP leader from Srinagar.
When it comes to terrorism, the Bharatiya Janata Party have very strong indication that we will fight back with the terrorism. We have no soft corner towards the terrorism. And anybody who harbor terrorists or who will shoot terrorists are equal to be considered as a terrorist.
India's counter-terrorism agencies have detained hundreds of people across Kashmir who they believe are connected to a larger network of terror activities. And there continue to be police raids focusing on what the authorities call white-collar terrorists. For the World, I'm Said Shahryar, Srinagar, Kashmir.
And now let's catch you up on a few things you might have missed.
In Nigeria, the schoolgirls who were abducted in northwestern Nigeria last week have all been rescued, so said the president of the country today. Armed assailants took 24 girls from their school early last week. Attackers raided another school on Friday. More than 300 students and staff were abducted in that incident. 50 students escaped over the weekend.
In Brazil, the Supreme Court ruled today that former President Jair Bolsonaro will resume serving his prison sentence immediately. That is after Bolsonaro admitted to trying to break his ankle monitor while under house arrest. He had claimed that a medication made him hallucinate and that he tried to solder open the device under the influence. The judge didn't buy the excuse, calling the former president's actions, quote, evident disrespect to the court. Bolsonaro was sentenced to 27 years in prison for leading a coup attempt in Brazil.
And in the Bahamas, a former NBA star is running for the legislature, Rick Fox, three-time NBA champion with the Los Angeles Lakers. He was born in Canada and grew up in the Bahamas. That's where his dad came from. Some of the big issues now in the Bahamas include high-profile corruption cases, an influx of people entering the country illegally, and the ongoing recovery effort after a devastating hurricane 6 years ago.
Those are a few things you might have missed.
You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The White House says it's making tremendous progress on a peace plan for Ukraine, and that, quote, a few delicate but not insurmountable details still need to be worked out. U.S. and Ukrainian officials have been modifying a 28-point peace plan drawn up by the Trump administration. It is not clear where those discussions stand now, but two of the big sticking points are about territorial concessions and security guarantees for Ukraine. The World's Matthew Bell reports.
This latest round of peace negotiations for Ukraine grew out of coordination between Trump administration officials and Russia, which should not have come as a surprise to U.S. allies in Europe, according to Ivo Daalder. He's a senior fellow with the Belfer Center at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government.
I mean, clearly the Europeans were shocked in the way, almost like Casablanca, shocked that there was a deal that the United States was willing to do with Russia, which is something that has been happening for the last 10 months. But as a result of really what looked like a big breach between Washington and Kyiv, the Europeans did say, we need to find a way to bridge this gap.
Daalder, who served as U.S. ambassador to NATO under President Obama, says the Trump administration started off here by adopting Russian demands for ending the war. Now it seems to be moving closer to Ukraine's demands. But Daalder says the possibility of the two warring parties being able to reach an agreement here is really a mirage.
Yeah, I am skeptical that there is a bridge between the Ukrainian and the Russian position, that anything that the Ukrainians accept, the Russians won't accept, and anything that the Russians accept, the Ukrainians won't accept. That's the fundamental reason we are actually in a war. This war is not just some mistake or something that shouldn't have happened. It's a war designed by the reality that one side, the Russians, want to subjugate the other side. And they're willing to do it by military force, or they're willing to do it through negotiations. But the goal remains the same.
Dalder says Ukraine's goals are unchanged too. It wants to continue to be an independent, sovereign country with territorial integrity and security. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty on Monday. He refused to describe what's being discussed between U.S. and Ukrainian officials right now, but he said President Trump's vision for Ukraine lines up with those same goals.
What is the end state? And the end state has to be, and this is what Donald Trump has been working on since February, is a sovereign Ukraine going forward, a strong nation, and Russia never trying again to attack it. That's what we try to achieve, all of us.
У нас есть каналы общения с американскими коллегами, они задействуются.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the Kremlin has an open communication channel with the United States and that any revised peace plan would need to reflect discussions that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin held back in August during their Alaska summit. Today, U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian officials reportedly met in Abu Dhabi to continue peace negotiations. Meanwhile, the Russian military continues to attack Ukrainian cities. Ukraine's government said a barrage of Russian missiles and drones fired at the capital Kyiv last night killed at least 7 people. Military expert Michael Kaufman of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace recently returned from a research trip to Ukraine. He says the situation on the battlefield is mixed for the Ukrainian side.
On the one hand, Russia has the advantage, but Russian military performance is simply not commensurate, not in line with Russian demands, the concessions that Moscow wants. And after 4 years of fighting, there's still a very visible gap between the military means that Russia has to impose its will on Ukraine and what they're currently demanding.
In the last year, Kaufman says Ukraine has lost some territory, but its military is not giving up, and while this will be a tough winter, it can certainly fight on for at least another year. Russian forces have made gains, he says, but only with huge numbers of casualties. Kaufman says the Russian military is likely to start losing more men than it will be able to recruit in the next year.
In many respects, the war has reached diminishing returns for Russia. If you look over the course of this year, Russia had made a bet that if they sustain the pressure on a broad front, at some point Ukraine would suffer a major collapse of the front line. That simply hasn't happened. They haven't even captured Donetsk Oblast, and they still would have a very long way to go just to capture the remainder of this one region.
Kaufman says the war is becoming less and less sustainable for Russia, but he's not sure the Kremlin has come to terms with that reality as it continues with negotiations toward ending the fighting. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
Wine is a big part of French culture and cuisine. The French economy also relies on it. So when grapes take a hit, that is a problem. Right now, climate change is drying up France's grape harvest. Add to that a tariff war and a generation not so keen on drinking, and you've got the makings of a wine crisis. One government intervention is to rip up some of the country's grapevines at a $150 million price tag. Alicia Gallet told us the plan is to reduce supply in order to drive up the price. She's a professor of wine management at the Burgundy School of Wine and Spirits Business.
This is the basic law of economics, and this is what they are hoping, that the overproduction would cease, and therefore they would be able to sell the remaining volume at a decent price.
So the grape farmers are desperate for help, but it sounds like they're dealing with a lot of separate issues that are converging at once. We've got climate change, there's trade policy, and also drinking habits. Start with climate, if you would. How is climate change affecting grapes in France?
The climate change does induce a lack of production, of vine production. First of all, we have a lack of water. In France, we are not allowed to actually water the vine, okay? Irrigation is not possible. So we have a lack of simple production because we have a lack of water. Then with that, we have an overmaturation of our grapes because they are not made for such warm climates. So they will not produce the right aromas or they will produce too much alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, every one of those aromas and what you call terroir, that's important to the product and the brand.
Exactly. The main challenge here is to keep making wine while staying true to the cultural aspect of it that is very important in France. And terroir, that notion, that word that doesn't have a translation in English, is at the heart of the French wine culture. So how do we keep making wine that is true to our terroir and our traditions, while everything is changing very quickly around us and our grape varieties are not suited anymore, our vineyard management is not suited anymore, and basically we are trying to keep a good quality.
Why is it not possible to water the vines?
Because we have a system here that is called the appellations of origin. And so these denominations of origin prevent us from irrigating the vines. We fear that irrigating would artificially increase the volume, but also dilute the wine.
There's also the cultural impact. Is my understanding correct that French people are drinking less, particularly young French people?
Yes, absolutely. This is what every study shows. They are still attached to wine culturally. They still consider it as an important cultural product, but they are not actually drinking as much. And while they are not drinking as much volume, they are actually drinking better quality of wines.
Finally, we have the economics, which are already shaky with lower alcohol consumption, but now we've got the U.S. tariffs to consider. How high are tariffs on French wine, and what has been the impact so far?
This has been a very difficult year because of the uncertainty of it. And this has caused quite a lot of confusion and difficulty in predicting what profits could be and what the plan could be. So the latest tariff is 15%. And this raises questions, definitely, especially for the entry-level wines, the volume wines that we export.
Yeah, it makes life very unpredictable for people who manage this stuff. It is a lot that you're facing, and we know what the French government is doing, but you're a professor of wine management. What do you think the industry needs right now?
Right now, the industry needs to move forward by basically accepting change. One of the main issues is our adaptability, especially with regards to climate change, where it's changing very fast and other countries are able to adapt, but because of our system that protects our terroir, we do not have the same capacity to switch varieties, to switch between regions. It's more difficult. So we would have to accept change. And this is a very huge issue when we consider that wine is, okay, an agricultural product, but it's also a very important cultural product.
So how far do you think this adaptation could go? Could you imagine a day when some vineyards will say, well, the European Union intellectual property protection that dictates we can't irrigate vines, we're going to start irrigating. Can you see that happening?
Of course. Some of them are already doing it. Some of them have gone out of the appellation system and have decided to irrigate. However, is that the answer? Because, if we consider, again, climate change, the same issue, if we consider that we have a water shortage, where does our precious water resources go? Should they go towards vineyard management and wine production when wine is not considered, priority food, for instance, for the humanity?
Wine, not a primary food for humanity. I can hear a lot of French calling that blasphemous.
Yes, of course. This is a very huge topical issue, let's say. We have to face it, and I love wine, but it is not a priority food to feed humanity. So for now, we can still consider it as important as it is culturally, but also economically. It's our second export, but it's the first agricultural product in value for us. So it is still a very important component of our economy, of our lifestyle. Yeah, it's something that we need to protect, and I think we are protecting it a lot.
Alicia Gallet teaches wine management at the Burgundy School of Wine and Spirits Business in Dijon, France.
Across Europe, governments have been tightening restrictions on asylum. That is true both of governments that lean to the left and to the right. Planned changes to Britain's asylum system appear to be inspired by Denmark, which has some of the toughest migration laws in the EU. As the World's Europe correspondent Orla Berry reports, it's a very different picture from a decade ago.
Sidra Al-Yusuf was 16 when her family fled Aleppo in Syria for Denmark. It was 2014. And Syria was in the midst of a brutal civil war. Al-Yusuf says she remembers those first few weeks in the small Danish town of Abernro very clearly.
Walking around, in the streets, people would smile at you, people would say hi. And I felt like quickly a part of this community.
Over the next 12 months, more than 1 million Syrians also fled for Europe. Many headed to Germany, where they were sometimes greeted by crowds of locals holding up handmade welcome signs. But within a year, Al-Yusuf says, the atmosphere in Denmark seemed to change.
At that time, you started being aware of the political tone in the news. People suddenly started focusing so much on the differences, the conflicts. So it gradually started changing the general mood.
In the Netherlands, far-right party leader Geert Wilders talked about an Islamic invasion of Europe. In France, Marine Le Pen, the hard-right lawmaker, said immigration was out of control. By 2019, it wasn't just far-right politicians who were denigrating asylum seekers. Mette Frederiksen with the Social Democrats Party in Denmark vowed to cut the number of asylum seekers to 0. Now, Britain's centre-left Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says irregular migration is tearing Britain apart. The new rules, announced last week, would fix that, she said.
It is designed to bring order and control back to a broken system that we know already is causing huge pressure across our communities and is dividing our country.
Around 1.2 million people came to Europe seeking asylum in 2015. Today, the figure is lower, around 400,000 in the first 6 months of this year. Yet, across the bloc, leaders are increasingly pushing for stricter border policies. Migration experts say that attitude is in part a response to how badly the EU managed the situation a decade ago.
Control was lost at the border. All the asylum systems were not ready. The reception conditions for asylum seekers were not in place.
Camille Lecouz is director of the Migration Policy Institute Europe. Far-right parties, Lecouz says, took advantage of the chaos.
The public is not against the principle of asylum, of welcoming people who are fleeing conflict, but they're concerned about the lack of control in the sense that this is not being managed. And so populist movements thrive in this disorganization.
Today, far-right parties are in government in several EU countries, including Italy, Finland, Croatia and Slovakia, and they regularly top the polls among voters in France, Germany and the UK. One European country, though, is bucking the trend.
España tiene que elegir entre ser un país abierto y próspero.
Pedro Sánchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, told Parliament last year that Spain has to choose between being an open and prosperous country or a closed and poor one. His government passed a law that will give hundreds of thousands of undocumented migrants already in Spain a path to legal residency.
Part of the so-called Spanish economic miracle of the last years and our recovery is in part related with the contribution of migrants.
Gonzalo Fanjul is with the Por Causa Foundation in Madrid, a non-profit that conducts research into migration issues. Spain, like many EU countries, has an ageing population. It needs migrants to keep the economy afloat, Fanjul says. But when it comes to border control policies, Spain isn't all that different from its European neighbours.
We are investing a lot in what we call the externalization of border control, that is paying somebody else, third countries, to stop migrant flows at origin or in transit. And we are doing this in agreements with some of the world's autocracies in the Sahel, for instance, or a dictatorship in Morocco or Mauritania.
Still, Fanjul says he'd prefer to see other European countries following in the footsteps of Spain and not Denmark. Some political observers say the Danish Prime Minister's anti-migrant rhetoric may be backfiring.
We just had municipal elections and the Social Democrat Party, which is in government in the coalition, they got a big hit because people are appalled about the language.
Michelle Patch is a global studies professor at Roskilde University in Denmark and author of an upcoming book on the country's migration system. The Danish leader's party, the Social Democrats, suffered sweeping defeats in local and regional elections last week. It was a protest vote, Patch says, against the governing party's hostile rhetoric towards migrants. Sidra al-Yusuf from Syria now works as a doctor in Denmark. Those election results, she says, have given her a new sense of hope and a feeling of belonging.
I feel myself as a part of this community. I feel myself a part of Denmark. I am a doctor here. I work here. I have my daily life here.
I just hope no government tries to take that away from me, she says. For The World, I'm Orla Barry.
After today's look at Europe's migration crackdown, tomorrow we shift to Latin America, where some countries have chosen a very different path.
You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. In my kitchen, there's a drawer with all our spices. They're arranged alphabetically: cinnamon, clove, fennel seed, etc. Jump down to the ends, and there's nutmeg. Now, that nutmeg, it most likely comes from the Banda Islands in Indonesia. The story behind nutmeg, and a lot of other spices, in fact, is the subject of a book by Nicholas Nugent called The Spice Ports, mapping the origins of global sea trade. When we spoke last winter, I asked Nugent to tell me more about how that nutmeg got to my kitchen.
The story of nutmeg is that originally it only had one source, and that's in the fabled Spice Islands of what is now Indonesia. And just a small number of islands, as you say, in the Banda Sea, so the Banda Isles, was the original home of nutmeg. Now, when I say original home, that meant in the 16th, 17th century, it didn't grow anywhere else in the world. And of course, nowadays, it comes from a lot of other places, perhaps the Caribbean, an island like Grenada. But as I say, I've started off at the beginning when you had to go halfway around the world to find any nutmeg.
So I want to get into how all these explorers were actually sponsored to get these spices. But before that, give us a sense of what the average pantry looked like for people in Europe before all these spices came on the scene. What did all this do to people's taste? Because it must have been pretty bland.
Well, that's my understanding. I mean, I'm no cook, but if you just, as you say, think how important spices are to our diet today, or our culinary experience, I should say. We love to spice our food up. We put all sorts of spices, and a good kitchen has all those spices on display for use as necessary. So just picture yourself in a world where you didn't have those spices and you didn't have elaborate recipes. You had rather basic foodstuffs. So certainly judged by today's tastes, that would seem very bland indeed.
I mean, it's a fascinating book you've written, The Spice Ports. It's nominally about spices, but the subtext is really colonialism and these early salvos of globalization. The Banda Islands, which you're talking about, they're part of what used to be known as the Spice Islands, as you said. Today, we call them the Moluccas. They're in Southeast Asia, and the spices in this region really inspired a much bigger concept of global trade. Explain that.
Yes, well, if you think in the days we're talking about, 16th, 17th century, food was perhaps rather bland, drink was even worse. So that's why spices took off. As you quite rightly say, it was the beginning of colonialism, because the European nations, starting with Venice, part of Italy, and then carrying on with Portugal and the Dutch and the English, all rivaled each other to gather this spice.
So the mariners, the explorers who traveled the globe looking for these spices, they needed support from their kingdoms. And two of the biggest sponsors were women, Queen Isabella of Spain and Queen Elizabeth I of England. Who were their biggest beneficiaries?
Well, yeah, I think you can't ignore the fact that even the monarchs were making a bit of money, making a bit of profit on this. So they might sound like it was a magnanimous gesture for their peoples, but I don't think the monarchies of Europe were quite that sophisticated. And I think certainly Queen Elizabeth, she made money out of the spice trade, which she then reinvested in the English East India Company, which was founded during her reign.
I mean, Nicholas, we have to remember as well that we're talking the brutal edge of colonialism here, a horrific period of history whereby mass production was being attempted by enslaving people who had no choice in the matter. They were abducted en masse and taken away and used for slave labor. Indigenous people were massacred. The Dutch conquest of the Banda Islands is just one example of this brutality, instigated by a Dutch explorer named Jan Pieterszoon Coen. What did he exactly do?
As you say, he massacred the inhabitants. He and fellow Dutchmen massacred the inhabitants of the Banda Isles simply because he wanted to put in his own farmers, effectively, to run the estates.
I'm just curious if you know how the people of Banda, of Indonesia, reflect on this whole period. Like, do spices like nutmeg carry some odd stigma?
There's quite, especially in Banda, there's quite a good spirit around because the islands are quite famous even within Indonesia because of their distinctiveness, because of their relationship to nutmeg and mace, and indeed the colonial past.
Are you saying there is a soft spot for the colonizers?
I think yes, but don't get that out of perspective. You know, it's not my role in writing this book either to support or to challenge colonization. It is my role to try to describe the past as accurately as I can and to understand these contrary attitudes, let's put it like that. I mean, India and Indonesia, the two countries we're mainly talking about here, are both very prosperous nations these days. And it is arguable that a lot of that prosperity should be credited to those who ruled the countries over centuries.
Yeah, with the understanding that rule also had some terrible consequences.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It was interesting when you said earlier, I'm no cook. I'm just curious how you kind of got interested in spices and the history with no real enthusiasm for the kitchen.
My interest is mainly geographical and historical. And it was spices that enabled me to tell the geographical and historical story I wanted to tell.
So, Nicholas, aside from the flavor these spices add to our food, what other benefits were made from the early days of the spice trade?
Indeed. Well, I think there were three things that the spice trade drove which helped the countries find the spices. The obvious one was boat building, shipbuilding. Then number two, I would say, is the technology of sailing, notably the telescope, for example, which was invented in the Netherlands but became popular in Venice, thanks to Galileo. And the third thing, of which I'm particularly keen, are the maps. The creation of maps and indeed the updating of maps, these three things are very important. But we could add the theory of economics, the importance of, to use modern terminology, the monopoly control, the supply chain. These are everyday expressions these days, but it was early trading, and especially early maritime trading, that gave rise to these concepts, profit and loss, supply and demand.
All in the service of making European food taste more interesting.
Absolutely.
Nicholas Nugent, thank you very much. Good to speak with you.
Thank you, Marco.
Nicholas Nugent's book is The Spice Ports: Mapping the Origins of Global Sea Trade.
The World comes to you from the Nan and Bill Harris Studio in Boston and the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. Find us online anytime at theworld.org and find our original reporting on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our channel there. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. And by FJC, a foundation of philanthropic funds serving the nonprofit sector with donor-advised funds, fiscal sponsorship, bridge lending, and more. FJC.org. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX. More information at theworld.org.